who can't join. Told you. Okay, well, good evening and welcome everyone. Thank you very much for tuning in to this information session about our upcoming residential seminar course at the University of Chicago. My name is Tim Murphy. I serve as the director of the Master of Liberal Arts program. This May, we're welcoming adult learners to spend a week with us on campus to complete an intensive residency course. The course is called Foundations of Bioethics, and it's offered through our MLA program. As I indicated earlier, I see a number of MLA students joining us tonight, and they'll earn a full course credit counting toward the degree through this residency week. But those of you who are interested in the course but aren't enrolled in the MLA, you're also welcome to participate in the class as a non-credit experience. The course will be taught by Professor Laurie Zoloth from the Divinity School at UChicago. And while the Divinity School is her main home, as we'll hear shortly, she wears many hats at UChicago. And this course, Foundations of Bioethics, is designed to provide an introduction to the field of bioethics. It'll explore how different philosophical and theological traditions describe and defend differences in contemporary bioethics. So I have a relatively brief agenda before we hear from Professor Zoloth. I have just a few more minutes to walk through a couple slides providing a broad program overview. And then we'll turn things over to the professor to talk a little bit about her scholarship and the topic of bioethics, and of course, the class itself. And after that, we'll hear from my colleague Callie in the MLA program, who will cover some details on tuition, accommodations on campus, and the application to the program. And we'll use whatever time that remains to open things up for Q&A. And so if you have questions throughout all of this, feel free to throw them into the chat as we go, and we'll get to those at the end. Otherwise, you're also free just to wait for the Q&A, and you can ask them directly. So I mentioned this course will be run through the Master of Liberal Arts program. The MLA at UChicago is housed in the home of lifelong learning, the Graham School of Continuing Liberal and Professional Studies. If you found your way into the room tonight, I suspect you're already familiar with the Graham School, but if you're not, welcome. We're the extension unit of UChicago, specializing in lifelong liberal arts education for adults. We have a variety of programs and courses. Some of them are pictured and described on the screen here, and I'd encourage you to visit our website to learn more. But just one high-level thing to say about all of the programs at the Graham School is that our adult students come from a wide spectrum of professional backgrounds in different stages of life. And increasingly in this remote education environment, our Graham School students come from different geographies. And it's that latter point that became the impetus behind our launching this residential seminar format. Over the last several years, we've been attracting students from all across the country and indeed all over the world. So 2 years ago, we created this residential seminar as an opportunity for our distant learners to gather together in person on our beautiful Hyde Park campus for a week of rigorous coursework and intellectual exploration. This upcoming one in May will be the 5th iteration of the residential seminar format. In prior iterations, we've welcomed students from California and Oregon, Florida, the East Coast, Boston, New York, and of course the greater Chicagoland area, among other places, for a week of spirited conversation and joint inquiry in Hyde Park. So you'll be in class 5 consecutive days, Monday through Friday. There's 2 class sessions each day, 3 hours in the morning, and then 3 again in the afternoon after a lunch break. But in addition to the class, we also organize social events, including a welcome reception and dinner, and a group dinner later on in the week. The format so far has been a big hit for those who have attended. I pulled 2 quotes from prior programs evaluations that you see on your screen here that I think captured the experience pretty well. But more broadly, in addition to these quotes, students who have joined us for the residential seminars have reported how much they've appreciated the opportunity to, of course, experience the storied campus in Hyde Park. And they've told us how valuable they found the in-person connection to be, and how much this intensive week-long format afforded them the opportunity to really devote the time and attention to the topic at hand without the usual distractions of life, work, and family obligations. With all that out of the way, I'm very happy to now turn things over to Professor Laurie Zoloth to talk about the topic of the May residential seminar, Foundations of Bioethics. And if you looked her up on one of her university faculty pages, you'll know that introducing her is a bit of an intimidating task because of her many roles here at UChicago and elsewhere, to say nothing of her very background and multiple scholarly interests. And so I'm going to sheepishly beg her pardon and ask that she introduce herself a bit and talk about her own background and scholarship in addition to the class. So I will stop sharing my screen and Professor Zoloth, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much, Tim. That was wonderful. It is really a privilege to have been asked to teach this class. I was thrilled when I was asked to be an instructor at the Graham School. It's a very coveted role, actually, because it's very exciting to teach students at the University of Chicago, and it's very exciting to have a whole residential moment to teach adult learners as well. It's a different kind of teaching, it's a different kind of immersion experience, and I love teaching bioethics. I'm so interested in bioethics, and I hope that this class will give you the kind of skills to dive into, the kind of skills and the kind of excitement about bioethics to dive into such exciting new changes in medicine and in science. So just this week, just yesterday, we learned, and it was front page news and top of CNN news, what Elon Musk had developed an implantable chip. And this chip he was putting in the brains of people who suffered from devastating neurological injuries or illnesses and had become completely paralyzed and couldn't do any motor activity. And I thought it was charming that it was Elon Musk who cares so deeply about computers, and the motor activity that he wanted them to do was to move a cursor, to be able to use a computer, right? So we're a long way from riding a bike or swimming or that sort of work, but it is a fascinating way to think about the brain, to think about the human brain, the human self, as a series of electrical impulses that can be stimulated by a device that will run this electricity in a different way through the brain. And the complexities are many, and the road to it being successful is extremely long. But I was struck by the fact that it was a new thing in the world that had profound ethical implications about control and about the meaning of the self. The meaning of what does thought mean? What can thought do? What's the relationship between thought and action? Classic issues in philosophy. And it was being decided by Elon Musk. Right? And I thought, wait a minute, where was our chance as citizens to think about this idea? How should we think about this idea? That was just one thing. The second thing that happened around this week was the approval 2 weeks ago of the use of CRISPR, advanced gene modification, to cure sickle cell disease, one of the oldest human adaptations to malaria that we know of, right? And sickle cell disease, obviously being a sickle cell carrier, must have had some evolutionary advantage at some point, because falciparum malaria is a devastating, nearly always fatal disease that haunted our shared human past. Actually, even the past before humans were humans, and even the past of primates. And here's this new intervention that can cure the disease that comes about as a sequelae of this adaptation, this genetic adaptation to malaria. And I thought about how far-reaching this genetic fix is, reaching all the way back to the prehistory of humanity. And I thought about how they chose to choose this disease, sickle cell disorder, to be the first target of radical genetic therapy. And then I thought about how expensive this was, an enormously expensive intervention, high risk and enormously expensive, but high reward as well. And I thought, what are the potential for thinking about new ways of changing disease, new ways of thinking about intervening in the human genome? This is a very important proof of principle intervention about this one disease. And it surely opens the door to thinking about making durable changes in adult medicine, not just in embryonic for embryos, but for adults, to use this to change our very bodies and our very selves. And there again, here was enormous change that touched on some of the oldest stories of illness and befallenness, the subject of religion, the subject of the philosophy, but there hadn't been an actual discussion about it, right? As citizens, which should be the disease? Is sickle cell the right target? What does that mean? And how should it be paid for? Other things that reach the headlines affect us. They're deeply interesting to bioethicists. Things like Ozempic. What does that mean about body size, about body weight? What does this mean about profit in medicine? How does that decision get made? Should healthcare plans pay for such an intervention? Is that intervention, is it a lifestyle intervention or is it a health intervention? What about its impact on cardiovascular disease? What about diabetes? Another big discussion that we need to have. So these are just a little bit of what I think about all the time, because bioethics is about this moment, this odd moment of human history in which the human body, most vividly, for instance, in the abortion case, the case of abortion, the human body and how we organize our bodies, if we get vaccinated, if we have abortions, if we permit or we don't permit these interventions, the human body is the subject of enormous political activity and enormous political discourse in the way that in earlier centuries, we had fights about moral status, we had fights about slavery, we had fights about war, or we had fights about empire building. And now we fight very personally, we argue very personally about the high stakes issue that has to do with our individual human bodies. Bioethics is in this way a new discipline, but an old discipline, because when we think about how we think, bioethics wants to take up with us the oldest question, which is what is the right act and what makes it so? And the same question that Plato tells us Socrates talked about in the Agora, about the objects of commerce or the family, or what it means to be a citizen, what it means to tell the truth. These are still the tools we have, the foundational tools we have to look at the most cutting edge issues, the most cutting edge elaborate issues of new science. Now, I'm interested in new technology. I'm interested in genetic engineering in particular, and just published a book about gene drives, which is a way to alter the sex determination of mosquitoes, malarial mosquitoes, to try to wipe out the disease of malaria. So I'm interested in very cutting edge technologies, but I'm interested in looking at these cutting edge and interesting technologies with substantially foundational tools, because I teach at the University of Chicago, where we care about great books and we care about this kind of thinking. The discussion about what is the right act and what makes it so is the foundation of this course. What is the right act and what makes it so? How do you know? How do you justify your response to these clearly hot button issues, right? So because an issue is popular, people will have all sorts of quick opinions about it and will think about it quickly. And may react to it quickly, but the deeper, more thoughtful, second thoughts about this issue are the ones where the field of bioethics resides. So that's the journey I want to take us on for our course. I want to think about five issues that'll be in the news in May, when it's finally warm and sunny at the University of Chicago and beautiful at the University of Chicago. 5 issues that we are thinking about are top of mind, chosen for their currentness and for their political importance, their currentness, but looking at them with foundational texts and trying to figure out this question: what is the right act and what makes it so? Should we proceed with CRISPR technology? Should we implant chips in our brain, right? What should we do about the health effects of climate change, right? How far should we intervene in the health effects of climate change? What do we do about significant healthcare disparities in the city of Chicago, in the world today? What about COVID? At whatever stage COVID will be in May 13th, 2024. All of these issues, we'll only be able to do 5 of them. And then we're going to be looking at a series of the classic texts of bioethics and the classic texts of philosophy and religious theory that help us make decisions about moral choices itself. So it's going to be a class very much driven by your thoughts and your questions and the usual exciting amount of reading that we do and a lot of interaction. I'm looking forward to that because bioethics really is a matter that's both personal and public. And the newness of the field lends itself to an exciting way of studying it because it is a field that did not exist when I went to school, barely existed when I went to graduate school. Philosophy was still a matter of hypotheticals, and bioethics suddenly meant that people such as myself were invited into the clinic to sit at the bedside of dying patients, to sit at the bedside of doctors making very hard decisions. As the new technology developed, doctors and nurses knew that they were making life and death decisions that had never been in their hands before. And some of these decisions in clinical ethics became the subject of the first concepts of bioethics. I wasn't studying bioethics. I was working my way through philosophy graduate school, religion and philosophy graduate school, studying ethics, social ethics, and policy. Yet I was working full-time, almost full-time, as a nurse in the neonatal intensive care unit, the NICU unit, to pay for my affection for graduate school that I kept being in rather endlessly. And I was in the middle of these dramas at work, and then I would go and I'd study some esoteric philosophy or literature. And I ran into a professor, David Hartman, a wonderful philosopher. And Hartman said to me, you know, you shouldn't be studying fiction. You should be studying philosophy. And there's this new field called bioethics, which applies philosophy and philosophic concepts, but uses real world problems. And I came to school in my philosophy classes, and I had real world problems, and I began to study with some of the founders of the field who had formerly been members of President Carter's first bioethics commission. There was a national bioethics commission put together by President Carter to deal with the phenomena of human subjects being badly treated and lied to and deceived in the Tuskegee syphilis experiments. And the sequelae of that experiment meant that people had to really think and rewrite new ideas about human subject experimentation. Women were facing new technologies to address breast cancer, and they hadn't been given full consent. And so we had to rethink what it meant to give consent to cancer procedures. And then, of course, shortly thereafter came the AIDS epidemic, and patients began demanding new ways of thinking about trial participation. And all of these things came together as the field was putting together its foundational texts. How should we think about consent? What should be the role of the patient? What should be the role of the provider? Do we ever lie to patients? How do you protect them, right? Who should make these decisions? And then in the 1980s and the 1990s came a series of court cases while I was in graduate school that drove the field further towards thinking about end-of-life decision-making. Karen Ann Quinlan, Terry Schiavo, cases in which withdrawing care would lead to the death of patients, and doctors and nurses hesitated at that moment and then said, we need help from other fields, from humanists. And that's how humanists ended up in a phenomenon called being strangers at the bedside. So in some sense, to study bioethics is to participate in being a stranger at the bedside or a stranger at the bench side and think, what should I do here? Now, every week at the University of Chicago and at hospitals all across the country, medical schools all across the country, ethics committees meet to make those same decisions. We do 2 cases every week at the University of Chicago to teach our fellows how you do it. Doctors and nurses still call on philosophers such as myself and doctors to come into the clinic who have training, specialized training in ethics, and help them think through cases. And so this class is an invitation to participate in that discussion, to be a part of such discussions, and to have the tools and the skills to do it. So that's my intent with the class. That's a little bit about me. I love thinking about these things. Don't tell my boss, but I would do this for free to think about these ideas because I think they're fascinating ideas. And I think that these are some of the most important conversations that Americans can have right now. The ideas about the scope and limit of human freedom and the scope and limit of science itself. And I have just published 3 new books on 3 topics in bioethics, and I have them here to show you. It's my show and tell. So you know that we will address all of these things. This is a book I wrote early on when we were trying to think about healthcare reform and about theories of justice. This is a book about pediatric ethics, clinical ethics cases about usually end of life. This is a book about bioethics and climate change, which I argue in the book is one of the subjects of bioethics. And this is a book about malaria, the history of malaria and the use of new technology to address the growing problem of malaria, which is, of course, as our climate gets warmer and wetter, becomes more of a threat to more parts of the world. So that's who I am. That's the research I've done. I'm more than happy to welcome you into my research questions and to learn from you as well. So any questions about the process? Come on. Have any of you ever studied bioethics before? So this is, I'm really curious about how you are here, why you came, why you think learning about bioethics might be an exciting thing to do for a week.
Well, for one thing, my adolescent son, he's developmentally, he has a learning disability and ADHD, but these are questions that he's asked, he knows about Mr. Musk. He knows about the possibility of planting the chip, and he's concerned about it, well, and I guess he's asking this question, is this something we should do? And is it, well, he doesn't use the word ethical, but he is concerned that this is something really different from where we are, where we've been, but it's where we are possibly going, where we have already been, according to what you have shared this evening with Mr. Musk, putting the chip in the, I don't remember which live animal or such that he put the chip in, but he did. So
he did it. Yeah, you're absolutely right. He's already done it. They did it first in mice, and then they did it in chimpanzees, and right. It to work well. And now they've done it in a human being.
It's a great. So I'm kind of excited because that's on the cutting edge, I think. And what is the right act, and what makes it so? And that I come from a English education background. I'm a retired teacher. I have a degree in theology, education theology, and I'm older. So I've been around and I've been in a lot of different fields. But I guess a question that came to me right away, and maybe this is a little bit putting the buggy before the horse. What can we do about it if it changes the world as we know it? So I'm Addie.
Really good questions, Addie. And one of the things that's interesting is when we think about the AIDS epidemic, we actually saw a remarkable thing happen, which is a movement of patient rights arose and changed how human trials were conducted forever. This was an extreme, a change that I watched happen as an ethicist. I watched patients invited into the process that had never been there before. So it's really interesting to see, is that possible, and should it be possible, and how should it come about?
No.
I saw Peggy's hand up.
Yeah, I've been on the Institutional Ethics Committee at North Shore University Health System for over 35 years. And this all resonates with me because we do consults upon request. And invariably, they deal with end-of-life issues. And the thing that resonates with me is the issues may all sound familiar, but the cultural underpinnings of a particular case is so important, depending on the belief systems of the family or the patient. And it's really conflict resolution. where do we go from here? The care team thinks this, the family thinks that, the patient thinks this. So it's a never endlessly fascinating thing to be a part of.
Well, thank you, Peggy, for your service. The really important work, such important work. And what ethics can do is not have answers.
Right.
It's somewhat different than conflict resolution, mediation, because we're not good at that. What we're good at is clarifying competing moral appeals. And we see this all the time in politics, right? There are sincere beliefs in American public life that are different, in part because we come from different social locations, and in part because there's real differences on how to be good. How to be good is a complicated question for an adult. And there can be sincere differences from people, all of whom are good-hearted and want to do good, but differ on what it means to do good. And so defining what the good is, again, the first task in the Republic is Socrates going around saying, well, what do we mean by the good? How do we know what is good? And that remains a vivid task at these bioethics committees. How do you clarify people's how do you clarify the ethical issues? How do you clarify the competing moral appeals? And then how do you judge between them? One of the hardest things in our society is judgment. Hannah Arendt, who we will read and who I really like for a lot of reasons, but one of my favorite things that she says is you can't be afraid to judge, that the task of thinking and discerning and then judging is centrally important. But it's very hard in a society like ours that, we value tolerance, and we care about being tolerant of each views, but it is also important to judge. And so that's part of the skills and part of the capacities I hope you emerge after 5 days is like, I'm able to judge. I can make a judgment here and come to a decision. So someone else had their hand up that I saw. The question on the floor is, what do you want to get out of this class? What are you looking forward to in this class?
I'm thankful for the awareness that this is bringing. I mean, where do you hear about this? Where do you talk about it? Yeah, just in the beginning of the class with the 2 things in the news. I didn't know anything about that. Sometimes my son, the one that I mentioned, he'll follow things like that and he'll be amazed by it. And his big question is because he has, he's used to having things be very defined, very narrow.
Right.
And so how is this gonna bring a change? How am I gonna deal with it? And I will admit that, as you said, we will have an opportunity to be a part of making some of those decisions in the class as a part of the University of Chicago, because that's what you do. You go and you sit alongside the people in the hospital who really have to make the decisions. And I thought about that. I said, I don't know, that's kind of scary.
Well, you don't have to actually make the decision. We'll talk about cases that are real, that we'll use real cases, and we'll with the identities covered in, because I always like to do real cases in my practice. And one of the things that's really interesting is there's a lot of questions that I don't know the answer to at all, and I will turn to you to think them through. The week before I teach this class, I will be attending a seminar about how we should regulate synthetic biology, genetic engineering when they make new organisms. What should be the role for the creation of brand new organisms? What should be the rules? And I don't know the answer to that. I'll come back with that question fresh in my mind, and I'm sure it'll be one of the questions that we think about. Some of the things there is more settled ideas about. When Evan asked the very interesting question, it said, what will the sources be? Will it be from a range of traditions or just the Western philosophical traditions? Because I've already mentioned Hannah Arendt and I've already mentioned Socrates. So what about the wide range of possibilities there are? And while I'm mostly a scholar of the Abrahamic traditions of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, those are not the only voices in American bioethics for sure, and that there's other sources, there's other foundational sources in addition to current sources from other traditions as well, from from Eastern traditions, from Buddhism and Hinduism as well. People who've written really thoughtfully about how other traditions look at the same questions, and the cultural differences are really quite important and often are often overlooked, and they really have to be centered, because as the adage is in Jewish Talmudic texts, who is wise? He who learns from every place, and he who learns from everyone. So those, when one talks about foundations, one has to talk about those foundations as well. Other questions or thoughts about this? This is a question from JC. Will you cover the ethics of health data collection and use once collection? Data is the new oil. That is a great quote. One of the interesting things I'm interested in is, a certain point, the development of statistics, the history of statistics. And the history of statistics, trust me, we'll get to bioethics here in just a minute. The history of statistics with Gauss, the mathematician Gauss, and the development of the Gaussian is so foundationally important, right? And the idea of the Gaussian curve and the idea that you can predict the future based on an average person came into play just this week. Because some major healthcare insurers, state-funded insurance companies, decided not to fund these new a new class of drugs represented by Wegovy and Ozempic. They weren't going to fund them because they said, well, for the majority don't need them. It's just a minority of our many thousands of subscribers need this drug. And they made the argument that we shouldn't fund it because it's only a minority. And I was thinking about what a bad argument that was, what a utilitarian argument that was, and how inappropriate that was, because you could make that argument about any group of people. Like, why should we fund anything unless every single person has it, right? Or a majority of people have it, right? And in most healthcare situations, thank goodness, because mostly human beings operate within normal limits, it's rare that something affects every single person. COVID was an example of something that did affect everyone, but most things are there's befallenness in the world, and it's in the subject of faith traditions and philosophies for centuries. And so if you just make your decisions about funding based on some average man, right, then it won't work well, right? That's not going to be a just system, right? So, and how we would know this is about data, right? I mean, how we collect and think about data has to take into account the fact that just because a lot of things are true about something or one population doesn't necessarily create an argument. It just creates a phenomena, an observation. So thinking about data is in itself an ethical choice, right? What does it mean to have an average man? What does it mean to be in the middle of the Gaussian curve? Should you make healthcare policy that way? It's a very interesting ethical question. So thank you for raising it. So I will have to say, we have to think also about animal rights, and I have a puppy that wants to get inside on a cold night. So I'm just going to run for a second and open the door and let her in. So I'll be back.
That'll actually be a perfect opportunity for the rest of us. I got to pull us out of the clouds briefly and bring us down to earth, just to cover a couple quick logistics. So I'm going to pull 2 more slides up, and I'll ask Callie to walk us through if it's they're pulled up.
You'll be glad to know, in terms of the animal rights, that she's not inside, so all is well, right?
Well, thank you so much for that. And yeah, if you want to join us on what seems to be an amazing journey, I'm going to go over accommodations and application real quick before we open it up to more questions. So accommodations wise, they are totally left up to students to arrange themselves. You'll see on the screen here that there's a few hotels that we know of and recommend, such as the Study, which is a hotel that is right on campus. And then alternatively, there are a few campus adjacent hotel options located in Hyde Park, like the Sophie. And staying in Hyde Park is not a requirement at all. So for example, Chicagoland area students are welcome to commute daily to class, or Oftentimes, out-of-town students will stay in other Chicago neighborhoods and similarly commute to class as well. But it's all up to student discretion. And then to move on to the application part, the residential seminars run through the MLA program. So our MLA students are able to pursue the course for course credit. It's the same cost as any other MLA class, and there's no application required. That being said, the class is also available for other adult learners as a non-credit experience. So non-credit tuition is $2,995, and a deposit of $500 is required within 1 week of acceptance to hold your spot, and then the full balance is going to be due by April 15th. There's also an application for non-credit students. It's a short application. I believe Tim is going to send it in the chat in a minute. And that deadline is Friday, April 5th. And we do rolling admissions, so you are definitely encouraged to apply early, again, to hold that spot. We'll be getting back to you soon after you submit your application. And yeah, it's not terribly involved or burdensome. So yeah, we're excited to read some applications and get the class off the ground.
I have to say that I'm from California, and living in Chicago can be a challenge, but not in the summer, not in May. It's one of the most glorious times in the city. It's a wonderful, wonderful time to spend time at the University of Chicago. It's our favorite time of the year, that beautiful campus. Hyde Park is an exciting place to spend time. And one of the most intellectually stimulating places that I've ever lived. And I lived in Berkeley. So it is a wonderful place to be. And Time Out magazine just said it's one of the greatest American neighborhoods. So, and I think a residential seminar will be really terrific. And we can do much together as a class community as we think about these issues. And there'll be movie nights, bioethics movie nights. So.
Any final questions for Professor Zoloth, or comments are also very much welcome as well.
If you have any more questions about the content of the course, the kinds of things we'll be reading, the kind of cases we'll be looking at, just feel free to write to me directly. I'm more than happy to shape the class around your particular needs, and and to answer any questions you have about about bioethics in general, about how you think about bioethics, or how you think about this course. Right.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. Well, that should conclude things for us this evening. Thank you all very much for joining us, and of course, particular thanks to Professor Zoloth for your time this evening and your fascinating comments. Her email was just thrown into the chat. I will add mine in as well. There I am, almost. There I am. So be in touch with any questions or comments, and I look forward to welcoming you all to campus in May. Have a great evening, and thanks again.